Nullification is powerful. We are getting to a place in New Hampshire where we can start to do more and more interesting things to fight back against the imperial machine without having to send people into the imperial machine.
Is the problem for Texas that there's not enough Republicans in Texas? Is that the issue? If there were just more Republicans in Texas, they'd be able to pull everything off? I don't think it is.
We can, through local action and local work, we can have an impact on the entire world.
The biggest threat to your personal autonomy remains the federal government, and you don't get to opt out of it.
Libertarians should focus on building limited for real societies like the Free State Project, rather than reforming an ever-expanding, uncontrollable federal government. Here to speak for the affirmative is a guy named Eric Brakey. Eric, please come to the stage. Eric, as you probably know, is executive director of the Free State Project. So it really has a conflict of interest. He served as a Maine state senator for 3 terms and was the Maine state director for the 2020-2012 run for presidential campaign. Clearly a headwind. Okay, now speaking for the negative, I want, if you, okay, you have a right to prove and you have a right to cheat. That's just noise. And no violence, also no physical. So speaking for the negative is Andrew Heaton. Andrew is the first thing that it says about Andrew is one of those things that has now become, as you know, just gone viral on the internet as a neutral. He is a comedian. That's fine. But he's also an author and political satirist. He hosts the Political Orphanage podcast. I'm a faithful listener. And is the author of Tribalism is Dumb, Where It Came From, How It Got So Bad, and What to Do About It. These guys are friends. I told him, don't sound too friendly this afternoon. He wants spirited argument with plenty of character assassination. I didn't mean that. That would be character assassination. Okay, now, you thought about it, you voted, please vote yes, no, or send on the resolution. And now, Brett, please close the voting. And now, did I do the, look for me, I did that. So, boom, I'm sorry. That's all done. We've started, and now, Eric, you have 10 minutes to make the case for the proposition. Take it away, Eric. I think you would focus.
Yes. Thanks, Eugene. It's my honor to participate in this Soho Forum debate at the 2025 New Hampshire Liberty Forum. I'd like to start this debate with an ad hominem attack against my friend and debate opponent, Andrew Heaton, who is a comedian, a political orphan, and his dog wears a bow tie. And as for his expertise on liberty for real societies like the Free State of New Hampshire, has he even been there? Actually, Andrew Heaton has come to New Hampshire on several occasions to meet with and interview members of the Free State community. His engagement is appreciated, and if he ever decides to leave the Imperial City, where he now resides, he has an open invitation to move and join us in the Free State. Oh, Mike, you're going to eat into my time. And at very least, I hope one day you will come and join us at the Porcupine Freedom Festival, where dogs and bow ties are welcome, and for which tickets are on sale right now this June 16th. Visit porkfest.com. And if you've never been to Porkfest, are you even a real libertarian? As for the resolution, I'm here to argue in the affirmative that libertarians should focus on building liberty for real societies like the Free State Project rather than reforming an ever-expanding, uncontrollable federal government. The key word here is focus. On which projects should we prioritize and focus our time, our efforts, and our energies? I'm not here to argue that we should totally abandon all efforts to send good people to Congress to rail against the corrupt empire standing on the corpse of our constitutional republic. I love knowing that Rand Paul and Thomas Massie are in the belly of the beast, throwing the occasional monkey wrench into the gears of the imperial machine and using their bully pulpits to energize and awaken the remnants of those who will fight for liberty. But as those who study economics know, almost all things exist in some degree of scarcity. When dealing with scarce resources, we have to make decisions about how we allocate them towards their most productive ends. In our limited lifespans, we only have so much time, so much energy, and so much effort to make a difference in this world. And if you want to see liberty in your lifetime, how are you going to allocate your scarce resources? We can spend our lives fruitlessly banging our heads against the wall of this corrupt and entrenched system, unlikely to change it ever through direct confrontation, or we can focus primarily on the spheres where we do have more direct control and we can make the most measurable impact. Frankly, Washington, D.C. already gets too much from us. They already steal our money and our liberty. Should we also furnish onto them voluntarily even more of our productive efforts and energies? And to what end? What good has ever come out of our national government? The Free State Project was established a generation ago on the recognition that we are in an abusive relationship with Washington, D.C. And no matter how much he says he loves you, to try to keep you invested in that relationship, you aren't going to change him. It's time to walk away and try something different. The Free State Project seeks to concentrate libertarians in the live free or die state with such numbers that we can practically affect the politics and the culture around us in manners you won't find anywhere else, to establish a libertarian homeland. After 2 decades, thousands and thousands have made the move. They've come here, planted themselves, raised families, built institutions, changed the local sphere, and also changed the world. What are the fruits of the Free State Project so far? There is a reason why New Hampshire is the granite cradle of crypto, where the earliest adopters and evangelists of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency technology built up and nurtured a parallel monetary system to challenge the Federal Reserve. There is a reason why New Hampshire is leading the way with robust homeschooling networks that empower families to opt out of the government schools. There is a reason why a quarter of the elected New Hampshire state legislature, regardless of the GOP label next to their name, vote like principled libertarians on Harvard, Thomas Massie, or Rand Paul. There is a reason why New Hampshire is consistently ranked the #1 most free state in America, leading the way on gun rights, school choice, tax abolition, and so many policy areas of freedom that there are too many more to mention here. There is a reason why progressive statists in the Granite State perpetually whine about the Free Staters reversing all their efforts to mass up New Hampshire. The reason is the networking effect of the libertarian concentration strategy. When we bring people together to focus on building liberty for real societies closer to home, the change we can make is measurable and limitless. But what change for the better have we ever seen in Washington? Despite all the time, all the energy, and all the money spent on federal campaigns for office over many decades, and I speak having made 2 failed bids to charge into Washington myself, we only had a very few people who can be described as libertarians and commoners. In those federal races, money matters, and our imperial adversaries have a money printing machine. They generate trillions from thin air and appropriate it to their special interest group allies who then launder a portion back to their campaigns and their PACs and their political parties. How do you compete with that? But on the state and local level, particularly in small states like New Hampshire, shoe leather still matters more than greenbacks. Grassroots movements have a political competitive advantage over establishing forces because you can win with very little money by simply going outside and knocking on the doors of your neighbors. Organizations like Young Americans for Liberty, formerly Students for Ron Paul, have helped to demonstrate this. In 2018, they did a strategic shift, shifting the focus of their young activists away from trying to elect people in Congress, because no matter how much money and effort was channeled into those big races, wins remained very scarce. Instead, they began focusing on electing people to state legislatures, and the return on investment has gone beyond anything anyone imagined at the time. In just half a decade of refocusing these efforts, Their count of Ron Paul-style liberty legislators in state capitals has expanded from a few dozen to 400. About a quarter of them, by the way, in the state of New Hampshire, where the libertarian concentration strategy is in effect. And while a few states stand out for the size of their liberty coalitions, I want to give credit to a few others. Notably New Hampshire, of course, Wyoming and Idaho up have had great liberty coalitions. The presence of liberty champions in so many state legislatures across the country creates opportunities for coordinated policy reform efforts state by state across the country. States like New Hampshire can lead the way on school choice, for example. And now any state with a liberty champion can see a bill sponsored and the successful example pointed to, building momentum for decentralized policy change around the country. And if your goal is to challenge the unconstitutional policies of Washington, D.C., sometimes the indirect path is more effective than the direct path. By focusing locally on state legislatures and electing people with a constitutional understanding of the 10th Amendment, the power of nullification can do more to effectively challenge bad policies from the imperial city than anything our few liberty leaders in the belly of the beast could do on their own. As Thomas Jefferson and James Madison argue in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, the states are the sovereign parties to the compacts that created the federal government and granted only certain enumerated powers to their creation. As such, state legislatures have the authority and the duty to declare unconstitutional the usurpations of power claimed by the once federal, now national government. States have nullified cannabis prohibition. States have nullified FDA restrictions on life-saving medications with right to try. States have nullified national gun grabs. And states are even in the process of nullifying the war machine with Defend the Guard legislation, calling halt their own National Guard troops from foreign war not declared by Congress. When in our lifetime have we seen such progress in restoring liberty from Congress or anyone in Washington, D.C.? In my 36 years, I've yet to see it. Liberty comes from the states, not from the imperial city. In brief, even if you're obsessed with defeating the corrupt bastards who seek to rule us from Washington, which I do admit is an obsession of mine, the most effective path is not to blow our time and energy on direct challenges in federal elections, but to erode the support beams that in the states that prop up their authoritarian structures. Nullify, 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 and then watch the imperial system come crashing down and see the opportunity for our republic to be restored. In conclusion, if you want liberty, don't waste your life throwing your time and energy against the walls of the fortified citadel of corruption we call Washington, D.C. Tunnel underneath it. Build liberty communities and institutions where you are, or move to New Hampshire and join in with what we are building in the Free State. If you want to see what we are building, come to PorkFest this June 16th through the 22nd and taste the revolution. Grab your tickets at porkfest.com, including to my friend Andrew Heaton. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.
That's the word. And he now has 10 minutes for the negative. Take it away, Andrew.
It's 10 minutes, not 15. That's worshiping it. Okay, well, that'll be fun for you. Okay, start a timer. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm very excited to start with Eric Brakey. I'm also a little bit intimidated to do so. I am not a professional politician. Never run for office. I've never gone out galvanizing people to get them to do things and then held a position in government like my esteemed colleague here. So don't easy on me. I also want to give a very big tip of the hat to Gene Epstein, the founder and moderator of the Soho Forum. I've held Gene for several years, and one of the great joys of my life has been Gene going from something of a mentor to something of an uncle. And for that reason, I continue to list him as dependent on my taxes. And I want to thank you all for being here. I love New Hampshire. This is a great state. I think it's a beautiful place. I also find it very funny because when I come to New Hampshire, I talk to so many people in bars and hotels and pooters that whine and complain about how unfriendly New Hampshire is. It's this really funny thing where New Hampshire is, no one talks to anybody. And everybody comes and tells me about how nobody talks to me. I find that pretty funny about New Hampshire. But I like it, and I like New Hampshire, and I like that New Hampshire, of course, loves liberty. That is a great thing about New Hampshire. It's the home of the Free State Project, of which I am a fan. I think you all have done incredibly good things. And I will add to the list of victories that have happened nationally in addition to your wins at the state level at the moment. But before I do that, I want to ask you a question. Would it have been better if instead of going to Washington, D.C., Ron Paul had moved to Concord? Instead of steadfastly opposing the war in Iraq and neocons at the national level, instead of critiquing your runaway debt, instead of talking about printing money, if he had, instead of articulating the moral foundations of society go on freedom and personal liberty and the ethical and practical downsides of forfeiting that and not playing under authoritarianism, if instead of the Ron Paul revolution, there had been the Ron Paul relocation to Maryland County, New Hampshire, would that have been better before liberty? If you think yes, you should answer yes. You should vote yes for the affirmative on this. If you think the answer is about, say vote negative. And if you're thinking, well, why couldn't we have done both? Why couldn't Ron Paul have moved to New Hampshire? Somebody like Ron Paul have moved into New Hampshire and built part of our community and helped build this up, and then also gone to Washington, D.C. If you think that, then you should vote no on the resolution. You should vote against that because you're on my side of the debate. The resolution says libertarians should focus on building liberty-free societies like the Free State Project rather than reforming an ever-expanding, uncontrollable federal government. The resolution is making a dichotomy that doesn't need to be made. It's saying you either need to focus on New Hampshire or focus on something else. I think you can do both. I think it's great if you're here at the Free State Project. I am also very glad that the Cato Institute exists and is playing defense to allow you to do what they're doing. Both are good. The affirmative is an apparently pessimistic position. It is saying that libertarians will never be able to sway the country to make real victories at the national level, so they should cut their losses. They should retreat, and they should hide. I don't accept it. I have more faith in America and people appreciating freedom in the entire country. And I have faith in you to pull it off. I don't think you should cut your losses. Eric detailed several very impressive accomplishments of the Free State Project. Let me extol a handful of libertarian accomplishments at the national level during that same time period. In 2010, Heller versus D.C. enshrined that individuals have a constitutional right to bear arms rather than as a militia. In 2013, the Cole Memorandum deprioritized federal prosecutions of marijuana, effectively deferring to the states on that. In 2014, the Farr Amendment prohibited the Justice Department from using federal funds to interfere with the implementation of state medical marijuana laws. In 2015, the USA Freedom Act curtailed the NSA's bulk metadata collection program. That same year, the Supreme Court ruled that Hodges be overthrown, that same-sex marriage is legal throughout the entire country. And I will add that the Supreme Court has made many rulings robustly in favor of free speech, not just in Washington, but in every county of the United States, keeping our track record of the freest speech in the history of mankind pristine. Remember how worked up everybody was about the individual mandate on Obamacare, where they were ordering you to buy insurance? 2017, Congress repealed that. In 2018, Rick Thomas Massey, who was mentioned earlier, slipped a provision into the Farm Bill that allow hemp and THC made through hemp to become legal throughout the United States, including edibles at gas stations, even in Texas, where I've been living recently. And finally, that same year, 2018, Congress passed the Right to Try Act, in which patients that are suffering from terminal diseases can pull off some very cumbersome regulations in order to try potentially life-saving medications. Those are all real victories, real libertarian victories that happened at the national level. And I will add to that, they're not just impressive, they're particularly impressive for libertarians when you consider how reviled you are by the rest of the country. You really swung them over your weight on those. The Democrats think you're all autistic Republicans. The Republicans think that you're just traitor Republicans. I like you, and I assume half of the room is comprised of former magicians. This is exactly. One of my friends who describes libertarians as the vegans of the political world. I think it's great. Noting that the incredible difficulties that you have as a political minority It is incredibly impressive what you have done. Libertarians have managed to pull off a surprising amount of legislative victories. You're punching above your weight. You were the tail wagging the dog, and I think keep wagging. Now, it seems to me that the Free State has been busy establishing a liberty enclave right here, and that's great. Libertarians have pulled off victories at the federal level, and that's what I want. I want both. I want you to defy the resolution and to embrace that both of these things are simultaneously possible. Now, I'll draw your attention to the latter half of the resolution. Libertarians should focus on building liberty for real societies like the Free State Project, rather than reforming an ever-expanding, uncontrollable federal government. Okay, I have some real reservations about the current Trump administration. I have some serious qualms about them. But it's hard to look at the first 100 days of the Trump administration and think, the federal government cannot be harmed. The federal government cannot be reformed or pissed off. It is totally inviolable. When you watch USAID funding get cut, NIH funding get cut, like a premier of the World Wrestling Federation is now the head of the Department of Education. Whether or not you like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, I think it's inarguable that they are shaking out the federal government. Ipso facto, the federal government can be shaken up. And boy, howdy, when the Republicans hanging out in the Oval Office are talking about how and what to shake, I sure feel better if there were a libertarian in the room. I'd like somebody there championing liberty, and I'd rather it be them than some theocrat or blood and soil nationalist. Now, right now is an incredible time of flux and transition and reform in the United States, and now is not the time for libertarians to cut their losses about. Now is the time for libertarians to be a part of that national conversation and make the victory that you have pulled off previously. The resolution's asking you to choose New Hampshire over Washington. I'm saying that is a false dichotomy. Vote no on the resolution. I think I'm down to 1 minute, so I'll wing it really quick. I've been in Texas the last 5 years. What stopped Texas from being a conservative utopia is not an insufficient amount of Republicans. That's not the problem. The problem in New Hampshire is not an insufficient amount of libertarians. The reason that Vermont is not a socialist paradise is myriad. But I'll tell you, one of the reasons that it's not a socialist paradise is not because they have an insufficient amount of socialists. It's not that we have a geographic sorting or concentration problem, because as wonderful as the experiments that you are doing and others are doing throughout the country are, they are hindered by the greatest threat to you, which is the federal government. The federal government is the one controlling regulations that you don't get to opt out of, controlling the tax code that you don't get to anymore, and controlling laws that are going to propel the whole country to live in an Overton window. So if you want to expand that Overton window to liberate the Free State Project where you can really build a libertarian enclave in your life, you don't want to forfeit the energy that has been going to the federal government. You don't want to draw the false dichotomy of this resolution and say, we're just going to focus on this. You can have Ron Paul, you can have the Free State Project, and you can have KO. Vote for freedom, vote no on the resolution. Thank you.
On this rebuttal, Prof. Screwed up. Fine, this rebuttal, Brakey, Eric, Brakema.
Right. Andrew, I'm sorry. Break your achy, breaky heart here. So first of all, I will say I reject Andrew's interpretation of the terms of the resolution. The resolution does not say focus on the state to the exclusion of all other things. It says focus on the state as, I read it as your priority. And I think it's akin to quote Jordan Peterson, right? Make your own bed first. I see it so many times in the liberty movement, someone with a lot of great energy, ready to make a change. You say, all right, you ready to get involved? What are you going to do? I'm going to run for the United States Senate. Maybe run for your state legislature first. Maybe you could win that and you could make a difference rather than throwing a lot of time and energy into something that you aren't ready for, right? Make your own bed first. Win back your community first. Establish liberty in your state first. And then once you do that, perhaps you are ready to launch someone like Lily Tang Williams into Congress to represent you. I think it's a good thing for us to get people into Washington, D.C. to fight the fight there, but it should not be our first priority. And I want to respond to some of the achievements that were, many of these are great achievements on the national level, but it is a little humorous to hear right to try cited as one of those achievements. As the author of the right to try law in Maine and the author of the right to try plank in the National Republican Platform, which I helped get adopted right before it was passed by the federal government, I recognize a lot of these reforms bubble up from the states. It is not a top-down strategy that got us to many of these accomplishments. It is a bottom-up strategy of many of these ideas percolating up through the state legislatures and folks on the state level, like with the Defend the Guard effort that we are pursuing right now, working to bring the federal government to heel using the power of the states. So I think that is a very important point. Great that we get people elected on the national level, but make your own bed first. I'll get back the rest of my time.
My esteemed colleague says, make your bed first. I'm telling you, the federal government has already wet that bed. Let's for the moment, put a pen in it. This is not a false dichotomy, though it is. Let's put a pen in it and say, really is purely emphasis. That's all we're going to look at here. What is a greater threat to your personal liberty? Merrimack County or the federal government? Take you up the side. I'm going to go out of the lane here and say you probably pay more money in taxes to the federal government. No, well, you've got a better accountant than me. I pay a lot more money to the federal government than I am to my Bowie County government. The things that you have an ability to do right now are to some extent on the margins because of what the federal government allows you or doesn't allow you to do. I don't like that either, do you, by the way. If this were a situation where you could just opt out of federal regulation and you could say, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to have that particular healthcare law. We don't want this particular regulation stopping us from doing free market healthcare. That would be great. That's not the world we're living in. The world that we're living in is one where the federal government can abrogate and stop all of your efforts and can regulate. The thing that's holding you back is not your energy. You've got great energy. It's not being libertarian. It's not wanting to do things. I think you have the ability to do that right now. But if you do it, you're going to find that there's incredible labyrinth of federal regulations that are stopping you from doing that. Right now, if you were to try to read the Federal Register, just read the Federal Register, you're reading at a normal reading speed. It would take you 3 continuous years to read through that. That's at the federal level. You don't get to opt out. So if you are going to try to focus on something and you're worried about an onerous government, Merrimack County is going to mess with your zoning. But the federal government can send you to work. It can kill you, it can take your money, and it can also give permission or with full remission on anything that you're going to end up doing. So I am saying once again, get the government to quit pissing in the bed before you make it. Thank you.
Okay, now everybody gets their chances at 15 seconds of fame because this is going to go out on video, on broadcast, and this is the time where you're challenging Q&A. I'm going to begin first by taking moderator's prerogative to ask this question, first to Eric, and then ask Andrew to comment. Eric, I think you're quite right that we want this debate to be more first about semantics. We're talking about focus. So let me ask you to make up out of the seating banks 1 or 2 examples of what somebody has to do to properly say to Eric Brakey, yes, my priority, my focus is what you want me to do. As you simulate, it doesn't mean that you in particular pursue national politics. But what is an example of a couple of people who are properly focusing? And is, for example, does it mean that you should have a residence in the Free State? Is that bureaucracy?
So an example of someone who is properly focused on building a liberty for real society close to home. And this is not exclusive to New Hampshire. I certainly encourage people to move to New Hampshire and join what we're doing here, but I recognize there are many paths to advance liberty. Some are good, but there are many paths. So I think that, again, I cited the example to shift the focus of Young Americans for Liberty over the last couple of years. For a long time, for about 6 years after the 2012 Ron Paul campaign, the whole liberty movement was so focused on getting people elected to the national level. They poured tax, they poured energy, they poured millions and millions of dollars into congressional race after congressional race. And hey, we got a Thomas Massey out there. We got a Justin Amash out of it for a while. We got a Rand Paul out of it. But there were many, many more people who ran. And the field is scattered with the political corpses of so many good potential liberty leaders who, if they had run for their state legislature first, if they had made a name for themselves there, if they worked to change things in their own backyard, they could still be fighting and doing good things today. So I think a lot of people, there's this attraction to the service of Washington, D.C., as this is the place to make a difference. And a lot of people, I think, are running the wrong way. And by the way, you can find some things that happen in Congress, but for the most part, these days, Congress the value is the bully pulpit, because Congress doesn't do much. And then post offices, and then they're handed an omnibus bill and say, you have to vote yes or no, or you're going to be responsible for shutting down the entire government, right? Congress has been completely defanged. An individual member of Congress has been completely defanged from doing much except throwing a monkey wrench on occasion into the gears. So someone who is doing the right thing is focus on more on their state legislature, focused on their city council, focused on making change in their personal spheres where they can. As far as, I'm trying to remember the other half of the question.
Well, I guess you answered both. Well, what about somebody who's unfocused?
So I would say someone who is up in arms about who the U.S. president is, whether they love the U.S. president or they hate the U.S. president, and they're obsessed, they're watching Fox News or MSNBC every day, they're yelling at the TV, and you were to ask them, okay, who's your local state representative, and they couldn't tell you, that is someone whose focus is in the wrong place.
Yep.
If you don't know who your state representative is, and you do not have the ability to call or email them, tell them what you expect them to do as your agent on your behalf, the president's never going to listen to you as an individual person, right? But your state representative might. What's your focus there?
And to not only want you to comment on the question and on Eric's answer, but I want to put a finer point on a related question, which is that would you be good to defend a resolution that it's fine, it's okay, it's a political life well spent to be focusing on reforming an ever-expanding, uncontrollable federal government? In other words, do you defend people who focus on reforming an ever-expanding, uncontrollable government? Comment on that, and of course, comment on Eric's answer. Go ahead.
Yes, I would defend that. I think part of Eric's answers are presupposing that you are directly civically engaged. You're either running for office or you're voting for office. That's part of the equation, but in a room full of libertarians, I would tell you society is bigger than government. It's bigger than specifically elected government. So I'll give you an example. I brought up Cato, and I realized we're in a room full of libertarians, so half of you hate Cato, half of you love Cato. Pick another one, the Von Mises Institute, whatever you like, right? Some think tank that's focused on national issues. I'm very glad that they're there. And I'm glad not just for me living in Virginia, as I now do, but I'm glad for you as well. Because again, you don't get to opt out. That's not how it goes. And so there need to be people that are focused on defense at the national level. There need to be people in media. I'm in media. There need to be people in media, and there need to be people in academia and in the think tank world that are going to members of Congress and giving them the intellectual firepower to push back against the unstoppable, unreformable federal government that can and will bulldoze over you. So I think the biggest threat remains not your local government. It's great if you get involved in that. I'm all in favor of that. But I think the biggest threat to your liberty remains a government that can print money, send you off to war, and regulate away whatever you do.
Thank you, Andrew. The usual protocol is to allow either side to ask the other a question. But let me waive that for the moment. I'm eager to hear from all the bright faces in the audience. Please line up. Okay, the microphone should be a little bit over there so that people can get line up. Okay, take it away.
Yeah, very good. The question is for our esteemed visitor. So you said that working within the federal government is important. However, Eric Brakey has laid out a path to win by moving here, getting involved with government, and there's a path of winning. There's a history of winning. 5 years at the very least, we've seen New Hampshire go from nearly the freest place in America to the freest place by a large margin. What's the path to win by choosing a national emphasis?
Well, I once again reemphasize, I would like for there to be more variability in the United States. I think that the Free State Project is great. I wish that same level of latitude existed everywhere. I think it would be great for all the socialists moved Vermont and who was born to a farm and moderates go to Ohio or where. That would be terrific, and it would be interesting, and that there would be a greater concentration in individual places. You'd have a libertarian state, a socialist state. The problem that we find ourselves in is that all of the states collectively are creating a framework that they have to interact in, and that's the problem. You don't get to opt out of it. I draw your attention to the last 100 days. The last 100 days, I think, are a pretty good indicator that the federal government is not as monolithic or obstinate as we are led to believe. Regardless of whether or not you like Donald Trump or you hate Donald Trump, I think it's inarguable that he's taken some shots at the federal government and that there are ways to shake it up. And I think that there remain legislative victories ahead, and there remain things to fight against the federal government. My concern would be if all the libertarians move in New Hampshire and you're able to do things that the federal government allows you to do in New Hampshire, and you no longer have libertarians in other states or in Washington, and you now just get off the drift. That would be my concern. So I would release that national strategy.
Coming to be right.
Thank you. I will say, Hinder, I think one of the arguments of mine that you haven't dealt with is the strategy of nullification itself. The idea that through state action, we can in fact check the power of the federal government. Yes, they wet our bed, but we could use nullification to stop them from doing that. So really, I guess I would argue, right, again, it's not the exclusion. I'm glad that there are some people in Washington, D.C. fighting the good fight, but in general, for the broad swath of the liberty movement, if we want to check the power of federal government, it's not by sending our best people to Washington and hoping it's going to work out for the best. In fact, I've seen a lot of good people go there, and the power and temptation of the One Ring or the dark side or whatever you or how you want to refer to it. I've seen a lot of good people go there and become very swamp creatures that we're concerned about. And I wonder, even with figures like Olive Frost, we don't know how that's going to work out in the end. I hope for the best. Certainly there's some disruptive force, but I also don't see the same disruption that we have seen perhaps from a place like Argentina with Javier Milei. So I'm a little skeptical, but hopeful for the opportunity there. But again, I want to emphasize that the most effective counters on the power of bad federal government policy has been bubbling up from the states through nullification efforts and through model legislation that we've adopted at the state level, that the federal government then comes along, hops in front of the parade, says, yes, we passed right to try, after so many states already did it, and they act like they were leading the parade all along and the original topics.
Thank you.
In fact, Free State of New Hampshire, So the resolution is libertarians. And I guess the question is, sure, maybe a couple of libertarians want to go and sacrifice their life like I did for 44 years, banning against the oppressive state and having no one listen to me, you know? Or do most libertarians want to come to a place where they can actually live a liberty life now? And actually breathe free. I won't even cross the border, you know. So I guess my question is, when we're talking about libertarians as a resolution, are we talking about libertarians? Are we talking about, you know, maybe somebody wants to sacrifice his life against DC?
I am a martyr by now. You're not doing the assessment, I'm a martyr. I think that was meant.
I think if that answer was addressed to you there.
I'll do that one, and also I'd like to address Derek. I'd like to insult back, Kevin. If you want to live in New Hampshire, live in New Hampshire. That's true. New Hampshire's a great state. I just say live in New Hampshire regardless of whether you're the return or not. It's a great state. I'm mad. New Hampshire's ugly as. They'll stand right. You go to houses that sort of shows the political ideology you should come here for. If you want to come have with the libertarians, that's great. And I'll say my version. This is my thing in life. I want the government to be small enough that I don't have to think about it. So for me, I'm fighting that. I would be hesitant on my end to come live in a community and talk to people about libertarianism all the time. It's like, I don't want to have to think about it. I want to get to the point where I'm thinking about Star Trek and skirt chasing and not thinking about monsters. But that, for a lot of people, they want to do that. That's totally fine. So move here if you want to be. In reference to Eric's earlier nullification and worthwhile strategies, I would say the biggest crisis facing the United States is the national debt. I think that is going to be a Weimar Republic double red alert situation that is on the horizon. It is a giant, slow-moving iceberg. It is coming towards us. And when that happens, your money is going to be absolutely destroyed. And being good libertarians, I think you appreciate that freedom and money are not completely separate phenomena, right? If you're concerned about the national debt, I would like to know the nullification strategy you could put in place to I think that would be great if you do to adopt that. Anytime, though, that the currency remains the U.S. dollar, I worry about what's going to happen to the country. In terms of the nullification going on, there's lots of really good laws that are done at the state level that I applaud. But you always have the sort of Damocles dangling over you from the federal government. So let's say New Hampshire goes a step further and you go, we're just not going to have drug laws anymore. We're choke law. It's your body. You can put whatever you want in your body, whoever is not your body. Great. Terrific. Even with marijuana, that's something the federal government's back down on. The federal government can still just come in and mess you up whenever it wants to. That sword of Damocles is always dangling over you. So all of these are good strategies, but the $1 trillion, 300 billion page regulatory bear in the rim is the federal government, and you do have to tackle them. And you oftentimes have to tackle directly.
No. Comment to Bjorn.
I think we all agree that national debt is this great sword of Damocles hanging over us, but right, I guess I'm channeling Tom Woods a little bit, who has talked recently about no one on the federal level is going to fix it. So let's give up hope that it's ever going to be resolved on a federal level for a federal record. Donald Trump's not going to fix it. Mitt Romney would never fix it. Joe Biden, Barack Obama, none of these folks are ever going to fix it. I mean, I think like two people in Washington, D.C. who seem to care, Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, and that's not enough. I mean, and the path to getting to a place where we can stop that financial crisis coming from the federal level through federal action alone, I don't see a path to get there. What I do see is people in New Hampshire who have built an entire parallel monetary system with cryptocurrency at Bitcoin. I see a resurgence of interest in sound money legislation around the states, restoring gold, silver as legal tender, removing tax barriers on sound money. Yesterday, we had a in-depth dialogue conversation about state legislation we could do on tax nullification, where the states can challenge unconstitutional federal expenditures and withhold sending the funds of their taxpayers to Washington, D.C. for these these unconstitutional, unauthorized federal expenditures. There are a lot of creative things we can do if we have principled, libertarian people who understand the 10th Amendment and are willing to utilize it in the state legislatures. The problem is that for the longest time, we haven't had those people in state legislatures. We are only just now in states like New Hampshire getting to the place where we have a concentration in our own state legislature where we can start to do those interesting things to challenge the federal government. That is going to be a more viable path to rein in the uncontrolled spending in Washington, D.C., than hoping that the politicians in Washington, D.C. will wake up and do something about it, because they have no incentive to do so. It's public choice theory. They just got no incentive, no personal incentive to do it.
Keep the sack question for Andrew. So in your alternate universe opening of the Ron Paul relocation, what would have happened is Ron Paul would have been elected governor of New Hampshire a few times. The migration rate of the Free State Project would have been an order of magnitude more than we've been the last 20 years. New Hampshire would have left the Union. Elected president to things. When Eric moved here, he would become president of New Hampshire. In this scenario, in your opening scenario, would liberty be more today in New Hampshire than it was? And if your answer is yes, then I have to vote yes, so I'm going to lose.
In the scenario you outlined where Eric Brakey becomes president of New Hampshire, sure. If that's the alternate universe that it happened, sure. In that scenario there, I push back lightly. I'm going to push back lightly in two ways. The first one is this. For a group of people that are so excited about liberty, and I'm glad that you are, I think you were being too diseased to design, and I don't like it. I want you to be optimistic. I want you to understand freedom is the best course of action. It's the most moral political philosophy. It also works the best, that America still loves freedom, that you can actually accomplish things. I don't want you to be defeatist. I want you to be bullying all of the things you're excited about. That's great. I don't want you to get into the mindset of, we got to get on a life route because everybody else is going to die. I think that is a pessimistic view of freedom and you in America, and you should be going that direction. In terms of the alternate universe where maybe Ron Paul becomes governor in this scenario, I don't think Ron Paul would have had the same platform as governor that he had nationally like president. The Ron Paul revolution happened when he ran for president. There's a whole generation of people. Sure, Eric knows a bunch of people who worked for Ron Paul. I'm sure there's a bunch of people that came in through that national presidential campaign. You're unlikely to see that kind of thing through a gubernatorial campaign. It's theoretically possible, but it's just not really likely, because gubernatorial campaigns tend to appeal to the people in that state outside of, maybe California, because we all hate Gavanism. But when we get into the other stuff here and then I realize you're being cheeky, but when we get into and then New Hampshire would have seceded from the Union, and America would have been totally fine with that, there wouldn't have been any problems with it, and the feds would not send in any tanks. I think we're now getting back to my position, which is, while I am wildly optimistic, and hope you are too, I am being the realist and the pragmatist here. And the reality is the biggest threat to tyranny is from the federal government. You can't just opt out. You have to engage with it.
Can't hear about all running. What's the question?
I want to be very clear and not running for president of New Hampshire. I will hand it to Andrew. I do think this is one of the strongest points that he's made, and it is one I think to contend. What if Ron Paul had went to New Hampshire? We having had the 2008, 2012 Ron Paul campaigns that launched a whole generation. Certainly, that is what inspired me to become the libertarian I am today, to get involved as an activist and eventually a senator at the executive director of the Free State Project. So I don't know. Frankly, it's a good point. I don't even know if I might still be a neoconservative today, right? And maybe I would have been on a path to become president of New Hampshire. Who knows? But I do think that Ron Paul is the exception that proves the rule, right? the value of the Ron Paul revolution was not even so much that he got elected president of the United States. I mean, you know what would happen if he got elected president of the United States. I don't know, maybe the CIA would have taken him out, right? But he's not the only person who's run for federal office from the liberty movement. Many dozens, hundreds even, have run over the years since, and we don't even remember half of their names, right? They could have, if they had done like I had done, and run for state senator, run for the state House of Representatives, they could have made a real difference there. I think the value of the Ron Paul revolution is that Ron Paul, when he got finished, he didn't tell everyone, now I want you to do like I did and run for Congress, right? People asked him, what can I do to make a difference? How do I continue the liberty movement? And he said, no central planner. I don't know. You got to figure it out for yourself. There's a job out there. You got to find it. People went and pioneered Bitcoin. People went and started homeschooling networks. People went and ran for their state legislature or for dog catcher, for whatever they did. Many paths to liberty, and those paths that are most open to people to making practical progress are locally and at the state level, and so many of those great people could have made a great difference, threw everything away by running for US Senate before they were ready, running for Congress before they were ready, and we don't even remember their names anymore.
Next question. Can I toss a question there? Okay, that's you, Barack. Go ahead. Eric, there are state policy networks. There's state think tanks. There are national think tanks. Would it be better for Cato et al. To pack up and become state level? So no longer have Cato dealing with national issues, have them based here in New Hampshire dealing with steakhouse issues. Would it be better for Dave Smith to quit thinking about national issues and focus on what's going on in the state capital? Are there people that would be better in general to no longer focus on these national issues, where you serve for them to go to their state and just focus there?
So I think, again, I think that the only value you can extract from a lot of these federal purposes is the value of bully pulpit and waking people up. But the hope that that is going to actually result in change at the federal level, I think, is false. Where the only place we see real practical change in the direction of liberty, and you look at Trump, and there's change happening. It's a mixed bag. Some liberty things, some pretty scary things. The only place where we've seen practical means for liberty is at the state level. Now, Dave Smith, and talking about how terrible things going on in Washington, D.C., activates new people to become libertarians and then to turn around and get involved in organizations like Free State Project and kind of making change on the local level, then that's an incredibly positive thing. I wouldn't tell Dave Smith to stop doing what he's doing. I mean, I listen to every episode, Part of the Problem. I think he's doing great in terms of waking people up. But then the thing is, what do you do next? Do those people run for U.S. Senate? That would be a waste. There are ways. The next step for them is they've got to get involved in ways that actually make a practical difference, and that's going to be more local and at the state level.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Ben. I moved to New Hampshire in 2021 for the laws, but I stayed for the community. Living in the Free State, that lifestyle just hits differently. I'm a landlord with Free Stater tenants. I hire libertarian tradesmen, and I use Bitcoin daily. Free Staters are raising libertarian children who are building intergenerational libertarian communities. I'm not just making a real difference for liberty, I'm living an unbelievably happy and free life here. So my question is, what's exactly the non-free stater libertarian argument against this kind of tangible happiness in community?
All right, well, I get it.
I'm very glad you're happy. I'm not meditating against your happiness, but this might say this isn't that kind of flavor difference between me and a lot of the Free Staters, and it's fine. But I'll give you an example here. When I first started traveling a few years ago, this is like 15 years ago, I would meet Canadians and I'd go, who's your prime minister? Is it still Stephen Harper? And they'd go like this. Yeah. And I was so jealous that they didn't have to think about who the head of their country was, or that they had to think about, they had to recall that. Can you imagine you're gonna get a country where you have to think about who the president is for a second? That's where I want to live, right? So I don't want, obviously I have lots of libertarian friends. I make fun of the use of Reason. I want smaller government, all those things. For me, I don't want to make my day-to-day exclusively interacting with libertarians and talking about libertarians. It's libertarianism. I want to not think about politics. That's my goal. So I'm happy to live like I lived in Austin, Texas the last 5 years. It was fine. Most of the time, the conversations I was having with people weren't about politics. That's where I want to get. I want to get to the point where the government is small enough and effective enough that you're not having to think about it very much.
Comment from you, Dad?
I just want to respond to something about, I think something that was said earlier about Cato. And, there's a lot of things I appreciate about a lot of great people at the Cato Institute. I personally wish that they would move their office from outside the imperial city and locate here in New Hampshire. And they can still publish their papers. They can still kind of preach about what's going to go on in Washington, D.C., but I don't see that kind of access-based approach to advancing liberty really working against the entrenched special interest structure that exists in Washington, D.C. I mean, we heard at this forum yesterday about the real nature of politics, right? There's two ways to try to move the needle. There's access-based politics and confrontational politics. Access-based is we give the politicians the white paper. If we say this is a really good idea, they say thank you, and they throw it in the trash can because they're getting paid off by special interest groups who don't like liberty. Versus the process where we put pressure on the politicians to actually, vote the way that we want by threatening their elections. I think that's a more viable path. And look, whatever approach Cato decides to take, I do think that they would do a lot better. And same goes for Reason. I certainly wish that Reason would relocate to New Hampshire and let you probably work your job, preaching about national politics as much as you want, Andrew, but you could do it from right here in the Free State.
Question for Andrew. Thanks for being here. We realize
You work on Brett Puckett, the Q&A. That's great.
What's your thought? I'm Rob, and what is your main, I don't want to say fear, like you're afraid or anything, but of the federal government's acts of reprisal against the states, especially given something that you brought up about states reclaiming their 10th Amendment rights as far as like drugs and things like that. Another specific thing that you brought up was they can send you to war, you don't get to opt out. Well, we just had a good presentation on the National Guard, Defend the Guard legislation, which does just that. And we're not opting out, we are just reasserting that we never opted in. So what's your real politic? Because you think you're a realist, we think we're the realists, and it's tragic that that gulf exists. But what is your real politic fear of reprisal from the federal government if we continue to do what we have been doing for 20 years here?
That's a great question. Thank you, Rob. If I didn't attend the prior presentation that you're mentioning, but if I'm familiar with what you're talking about with the National Guard Act or the Defend the Guard Act, thank you, which is wonderful legislation, as I understand it. That's basically saying, look, the federal government can't call up our National Guard unless you actually declare war. I think Texas too. This should be in every state in the union. I fully support this. In my lifetime, we've not had an active draft, but that remains a power of the federal government. So even if you were to pass that very good law, you could have the federal government draft people, and it has drafted people. Within my lifetime, you've had the federal government go, no, you don't get to do that. So for example, during the Reagan administration, not that long ago, the federal government went, we've decided that states are gonna have 21 as the minimum for when you drink. That's how that works from now on. And states went, well, that's not your prerogative, that's our prerogative. And the federal government went, well, then you're not getting highway funding. And just stop that. And that's why every state in the union, I think save one now, has a 21 on that. I don't think of it so much punitively. I'm not worried about the government. If you all secede and Eric runs for president, I am worried that you'd have the government roll in with tanks and things. But in terms of the fear that I would have, it's not so much reprisal, it's more of, I just see this morass that's holding you all back from doing things. So Vermont next door, I love that New Hampshire and Vermont are next door to each other. I think this is New England's wonderful for what you're doing because you can vote with your feet. It's this region where you can jump around, it's great. Vermont has the highest amount of secessionists in the country proportionally. I don't even know that, but there's actually more secessionists in Vermont than Texas, and they want to go to Canada. A few years ago, they wanted to do single-payer healthcare. They couldn't, they ended up shutting it down. They couldn't afford to do it, and I'm not surprised by that. For all of the economic reasons that Gene could elaborate on, but also because they were paying into Medicaid and Medicare on top of their own state programs, so they can't go socialist because they have to stay within this weird system that we have. If you all in New Hampshire want to embrace free market healthcare, that would be great. I would be very much in favor of that. You would have a real difficult time being able to implement that. Your ability to get free market healthcare put in with all of the perversions in the tax code would be something that you would deal with constantly. The regulations that would impede you, it would be all over the place. So it's not so much that I think the federal government's going to come in and smack everybody around and like lock up members of the state house. Although again, President Brakey might have that happen. It's more of, I think that there's this morass that's holding you back from actualizing what you're trying to do. And the scary thing for you all is this, because we keep talking about the lack of palpable victories at the federal level. What if all of that activity that's happening at the federal level right now is just holding it back? That's what's going on. It's just holding back that advance. And when you remove that energy, that is now unblocked and it just goes forward. That would be my concern.
Comment from you, Eric.
Well, I'm trying to remember, what was the original question?
What's the main tangible fear of you don't get to opt out or you can't do things against the federal government? Even though we're doing it under the guys who go under.
Yeah. Well, I think that the federal government makes a lot of threats, and sometimes they try to carry through on these threats. We certainly saw when California nullified cannabis for a while, they did send in federal agents and raid people, but eventually, as more and more states acted and nullified, they just didn't have the manpower to continue enforcing it. And we heard from former Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, who helped eventually defund that. But it was the states pushing back that led to that outcome. State by state pushing back. And thanks to the Supreme Court precedent of the anti-commandeering doctrine, it's recognized that they don't have the authority to commandeer our state resources to enforce their federal laws. As much as we are afraid of the ATF and all of these federal agencies, the fact is they don't actually have the manpower to enforce their edicts across the entire country if states start saying, no, we're not going to follow this, we're not going to obey this. And I will say it is a challenge when they steal our money and they ransom it back to us with strings attached. This is why we had a conversation yesterday on tax nullification, a way to try to combat that. But there is still resolve in states like New Hampshire that are willing to say, you know what? We get that it's our money that was stolen from us, and we would love to have it back, but we're not going to trade away our freedoms for it. I mean, that's why even for small things, like in New Hampshire, right? New Hampshire is the only state in the union where you do not have to wear a seatbelt if you are an adult with a gun pointed to your head under threat of the law. I personally think you should wear a seatbelt because I want you to stay alive, but that should be your choice. And even though federal highway funds are lost over that, in New Hampshire, we say, you know what, our liberties are worth more than that. So we can push back if we have the will in state legislatures to do so.
We're running out of time. Ask your questions, but then they might be part of the summaries. But please ask your question briefly. Take it away.
Unlike these conformists, this one will be for the Honorable Eric Brakey. If we just define a metric, we call it delta liberty, the change in liberty in a population, and we somehow just transfer Ron Paul from what he's doing now to stay a Gen Court senator right now, do you think the delta liberty in the negative of the rest of the country will be less than or greater than the gain in liberty here in New Hampshire?
All right, you're going to think about that question for your summary. Final question.
So almost 200 years ago, we had a great victory for monetary freedom when Andrew Jackson vetoed the second bank of the United States. That was through the federal approach. I was involved in the monetary freedom movement before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin, and now we're facing a prospect of a much brighter future. Do you think that we would be better off if we had repeated that approach of seeking a president to veto the Federal Reserve than we have through pursuing open source and development of new alternatives and rigorous adoption of monetary practice?
Thank you. And that question you can think about for your summary. Since I know I want to respect the clock and stomach, so probably growling for lunch in a few minutes, I want to just give each side 3 minutes for summary. And the affirmative goes first on the summary. Do you want to take the podium or do you want to do it from the chair? Whatever. 3 minutes for a summary.
I'll do it from the chair. All right. I appreciate the last question. I think that is a great example. The Bitcoin cryptocurrency revolution that's taking place, that New Hampshire played a very big part in because of the concentration strategy and the networking effect of libertarians here, is a great example of how, even through not directly political means, we can, through local action and local work, we can have an impact on the entire world. And the fact of the matter is, as much as I love the audit the Fed legislation that was put forward year after year by Ron Paul, and did at one point pass the U.S. House of Representatives, only to die in the U.S. Senate. My U.S. Senator at the time, Angus King, voted against it. Boo, he sucks. If we had just waited around and thought we're going to keep pushing for audit the Fed legislation and one day we'll finally get to audit the Fed and things will unravel from there, we would still be waiting. But the fact is, people said, you know what? We can keep pushing for that, but that should not be the exclusive priority focus of ours. Rather than waiting for a solution to come through DC from the people who have no incentive to actually restrain the power of Washington, DC, people said, we're just going to build our own parallel system, and it has revolutionized the world. And I think that, again, I want to make sure we're framing the resolution right. It is not to say that we should never run someone for Congress. No one should ever run for Congress. We should not talk about Washington, D.C. I talk about Washington, D.C. all the time. I talk about the evil empire that we live under all the time. And in fact, that spurs me and so many on to say, how do we fight back? And we find the solutions are through actions in areas that we actually do have a zone of control over. And that is on the local level, on the state level. The power of nullification is powerful. We are getting to a place in New Hampshire where we can start to do more and more interesting things to fight back against the imperial machine without having to send people into the imperial machine. We can do it from right here in New Hampshire, and maybe if you're fortunate enough to live in another state where there's some fertile ground to fight back, they're doing good things in Wyoming, some interesting things are happening in Florida. You don't have to go into the system to beat the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. 3 minutes. 3 minutes of summary from you. Andrew, take it away.
Thank you. Today, when you're driving back to your homes, do so without wearing a seatbelt. And while you're doing that, I want you to think about your federal tax footprint this year. Drive home without the seatbelt. Think about how much you're paying in taxes to the federal government. Just think about that for a minute. Because I think between those two, the taxes are a far bigger obstacle to your personal autonomy than the seatbelt law is. I agree symbolically with all of that, but the biggest threat to your personal autonomy remains the federal government, and you don't get to opt out of it. I like all of the strategies that have been put out by Eric. I like what the Free State Project is doing. I do, to a great extent, reject the idea that you got to pick one or the other. I don't think you necessarily have to. But if you're going to pick one or the other, what I would recommend is you don't take the position that you can just opt out of what you don't want to deal with, because the federal government's still going to be there, and the federal government remains the biggest threat to you. The next thing that I would question is, again, big fan of the Free State Project and what you're doing. That's great. Let's look at another state for a minute. Is the problem for Texas that there's not enough Republicans in Texas? Is that the issue? If there were just more Republicans in Texas, they'd be able to pull everything off? I don't think it is. I lived in Texas for 5 years. Trust me, they're doing fine in terms of Republicans. They've got plenty of Republicans there. So I don't think that the issue holding back Texas, which is a giant booming economy and is doing a lot of really good things, is that there's an insufficient amount of people that believe that particular political philosophy, many of which are libertarian. I would posit that the ultimate issue is going to be federal interference with what's going on, including trying to actualize a liberty enclave. I stand by my position that Ron Paul made a huge impact by running nationally, by looking at national matters, by looking at matters that affect everybody, like going to war and the debt and the deficit, that his efforts were not wasted for doing that they were better at the national level than they would have been looking at a state legislature or even running for governor. And I ask you to vote for freedom and vote no on the resolution. Thank you.
Okay. Brett, to my chief technical officer, Brett, please open the final voting. If you voted the first time, please vote the second time. Yes, no, or undecided on the resolution. Libertarians should focus on building liberty for real societies like the Free State Project, rather than reforming an ever-expanding, rather than reforming an ever-expanding, uncontrollable federal government. I have in my hand the Soho Forum Tootsie Roll that will be handed to the winner, the person who moves the needle in his favor. You understand, it doesn't matter about who gets the majority. It's a before and after vote. The initial vote was the control. The final vote is who swayed the audience the most. That's the person who gets the invaluable Soho Forum Tootsie Roll. While you're voting and pondering, I want to again remind you that if you go into thesohoforum.org, you will find monthly debates, May, June, July, and we're scheduling one in August very shortly. You can buy tickets online, come to the debate, come to the party afterwards, get to know people, maybe enjoy a Broadway matinee the next day. A little time spent in Sin City, communing with other libertarians. Also remind you that all 100 of our debates are available on the Reason channel on YouTube or on podcast. A whole range of topics. This one, I think, will be way up there. You'll all be pretty famous pretty soon because it will be posted. Brett, tell me, you have the results. Okay, drum roll, please. Oh, I got to put on my reading glasses. Sorry. I had anyway. Could you? Okay.
I'll be happy to read them.
No, sir. Okay. All right. The Libertarians should focus. The yes vote in favor of Eric Brakey gained 1.43 percentage points. The no vote gained 14 percentage points. Now, but just a moment. Of course, I want to point out that that was just a matter of movement. It still turns out that more than 2/3 of the people who voted still agree with Eric. However, the no vote moved more than the yes vote, and therefore the Soho Forum Tootsie Roll, which I'm going to find in a moment, goes to Andrew Heaton. Thank you to both of you for a great debate.